Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the webinar. We at Transform Future Skills are extremely honored to have Global Gyan, who's one of our key partners today on the Future Skills initiative itself, to be leading this webinar with us. And we have very eminent panelists as part of our speakers today, and it'll be really nice for us to know them before we get started with the webinar. So without wasting any further time, I'll quickly walk you through some details of our panelists. So Global Gyan, like I already mentioned, is a key partner for Future Skills Initiative and largely on the professional skills offerings. We have the courses housed on our portal. Dr. Korwar, who's our main facilitator for the session today, he comes with a very rich and diverse experience across industry as well as academia. And as you would see, he's also the co-founder of the School of Design Thinking in Chennai and an award-winning author as well. The second panelist for today is Mr. Srivasa Adipalli. He's also the co-founder and CEO of Global Gyan, and again, a very eminent person from the industry, has worked in organizations like Tata Communications, and is also an award-winning author and a business case writer. Without wasting any further time, I am handing the stage over to Dr. Korwar.
Great, thank you. Welcome to this session on planning when plans go bust. And hopefully, I'll just go on. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. This is, I'm told, the most commonly asked question in today's world. Can you see my screen? You cannot see it, right? Really, you can see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So today, what is very clear is that everybody's plans have gone bust. And that, I think, can be said without any fear of contradiction. So what we are going to talk about today is, how do we do this in this kind of world? Does it even make sense to do it? So our conversation today is in 4 parts. We will begin by really talking about metaphors. The metaphor that we are using today for planning or thinking about the world, is that the appropriate metaphor? In that case, what is planning? Is planning worth it? That is the second part of our conversation today. The reality is that we are living in a world of uncertainty. And the question is, what kind of uncertainty do we have? There are different kinds of uncertainty, and how you deal with them depends on which kind you have. And in the last segment, we'll talk really about what happens when the dawn breaks and the world begins again, which it will sooner or later. It has already begun in some parts of the world after this coronavirus. How really should we think about ourselves and about our organization? In the meanwhile, of course, there is, I believe, a chat window, and you can keep making comments. We will have time during the session to ask for your input as well, and we will do that as well. So the first, let me begin by addressing the metaphor question. See, the usual metaphor when we talk about planning. Again, why I think metaphors are important is because actually our entire life is driven by metaphors. We don't recognize it. But everything, like we talk about career, climbing the ladder, I mean, it's a metaphor, right? When we talk about launching a product, that is a metaphor. Planning is also done implicitly using a metaphor, which we don't recognize. But it's important to recognize that metaphor because maybe then we need to change it. So the metaphor that we use in planning, I think, is a metaphor of mountain climbing. You are somewhere, you need to go somewhere, you know what the summit is, you can see Everest, you can figure out what the base camp is, you can figure out camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, and you can see the route. Of course, getting there is not easy, but you still have to, you have at least a sense of certainty. This kind of model works well in a world of certainty. The summit is known, the route is known. Of course, we still have to get there, but you do know, and then you have to figure out what are the resources I need, get those resources, and then you're on your way. Of course, things can happen, but broadly speaking, this is a world of certainty. Although anyone who actually climbs Everest will tell you there's no certainty about it. An avalanche can happen anytime, and you can get killed about 2 meters below the summit. But the model that we use is not our real life on Everest. The model we use is of a climbing a mountain. And the question really is this the right metaphor to use? Very clearly, it is not the right metaphor to use. Because in the world we really live in today, we don't know where the summit is. We don't know where we are. There is no clarity about anything. In fact, a better metaphor could be lost in the jungle. Right? This is a clip from Jurassic Park, something. That this guy goes out there, he has no idea what kinds of creatures are in there. It's raining, it's foggy. This creature comes up, he doesn't know whether it's friendly, he doesn't know if it can fly, he doesn't know if it is going to kill him. Actually, it does kill him, but he doesn't know that. And the fact is, you can't see anything. All you can hear is a few sounds, and from that you have to interpret what is going on. You don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, you don't know what that sound is. This is a typical world we live in. So, in my opinion, climbing a mountain is a bad metaphor. We need to replace it with lost in the jungle. And if you think about that, if you are lost in the jungle, what would you do? Anyone would like to share some thoughts? You can do that on the chat window, perhaps.
Yeah, while we do that, Dr. Korwar, there are a couple of participants who highlighted that the audio is not very clear.
Okay. So let
Dr. Korwar, we lost you now. Your video also has gone on a freeze mode.
think Dr. Korwal will be joining back. I guess he's got disconnected. But I think the question I would like to ask the attendees: what would you do if you are lost in the jungle? How would you deal with the situation? So maybe if you could share some of your thoughts, then we can we can look at what are the options. What would you do if you were lost in the jungle? How would you deal with that situation?
So requesting all participants to use the chat window. Some of you have been posting responses on the questions window too. For now, we'll pick it up, but please use the chat. So a few responses are already popping up.
Okay, so Suchita, maybe if you can read them out, because I think they may have sent it only to the organizer. So please also, when you're sending a message, just choose the organizers and panelists option. But maybe if you could read out some of the messages, then we can we can respond, and I'll try and pick up from where Dr. Korwar left off as he gets back.
Sure. So I have one response from Vivek Chauhan. He said, we'll find river and follow the river path so that I can find human habitat. Shaumin says, first we take some defensive measures. Anurag has suggested that he would look for any company. Madhav says he looked for cell phones or compasses if they're allowed. Okay, there's a question he's asking. He's asking if a cell phone or compass is allowed. That's more a question.
It depends. I mean, you can make your assumptions of what resources are available to you, but so yeah, if you have a cell phone or a compass, you could probably try to find some direction. I think Dr. Korwar has come back. So yeah,
Yeah, I
so
just came back. I
some
lost my
interesting.
internet completely. Yeah, keep
Yeah.
going.
So I was reading out a few of the responses from participants, Dr. Korwar. So we have another one from
Yeah.
Debargia, who has said, probably depends more on my basic instinct and find means of surviving through the course. Uh, Similarly, some more have said we go by instinct.
No,
Okay,
I
so
think instinct is very true, and there's no question at all that your instinct is the only thing you have really to rely on. The really important question, though, is how do we cultivate the right kind of instinct? Because what you're really talking about here is um, really lack of any knowledge about what is really going to go to happen. So knowledge is really absent. What you really have to rely on is instinct. That's the only thing that.
We have
Okay.
a
Any
couple.
other comments?
Two, yes, we have a couple more. So they said we'll move around the jungle
Yeah.
in search of path, or I'll make myself
Yeah.
brave and brave this through. And also at night, get on the highest point on a tree. Another one has said,
Yeah.
way to come out of the jungle, maybe some path or
Right.
so, and so to quench my hunger.
Right. Now, all those are very good thoughts, and I think becoming brave is really the key to the whole thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Because what you're really seeing is you need a change in mindset. You need to become a different kind of person to be able to handle the kind of uncertainty that we see in this world. And towards the end of this session, we will talk about that. So yes, the fact is the planning process in when you're lost in the jungle is not the same as planning when you're trying to climb a mountain. Essentially, here the most important thing is cultivating your own inner strength, listening, picking up cues, trying to interpret what you're hearing, and really thinking one day at a time. Because you don't know if you're going to be alive tomorrow. What you can try to make sure of is that you get through the night. And that's really what the whole essence of planning in this kind of world is about. I think all of us would agree with that. And I think those are comments on the chat also suggest that. So let me move on. What do we do? I think, what can we do? Can we give up on planning? Should we not plan at all? Should we just ditch all our plans? We'll save a lot of paper, certainly, if we throw away all our plans. Should we curl up and die? That's certainly not a very good idea. Should we bury our head in the sand? And here at this point, I think let's launch that poll. What do you think we should do in this kind of world? Just to see, get a sense for where you think we should be. So can you launch that poll?
Yes.
Do I have to stop showing the screen?
So I think now everyone is able to see the whole screen.
Oh, okay, great.
How many seconds more do they have, Dr. Korwar, to poll?
A couple seconds more is good enough. I think we can.
Okay, I'm close to it. Can you see the poll results on the screen now, Dr. Purva?
Let me check. I don't see them yet.
Yes. So 66% are saying that they do it more frequently than before. 26%
Yep.
say they do the plan for every event like Corona. And 3% say stop it. Execution is more important. And 2% each for involving consultants like McKinsey, and stop it is a waste of time.
Good. Okay. Now, so the most common one was what?
Do it more frequently than before.
The most popular. Yeah. Okay. So do it more frequently than before makes good sense, because what you're really saying is when things are changing, then you should really be doing things or doing this planning cycle more frequently, being more agile in short. Now, there's a couple of thoughts that we would like to share with you about what is the value of planning in this kind of world. Should you at all do it? And Srini, would you like to take over here? Or what do we do?
Yeah. So if you could just go to the slideshow. Yeah.
Yeah, about this true story.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting story that I first heard from Dr. Korwar about this army unit that was lost in the Swiss Alps, and it was a very bad situation. There was a blizzard. They were really lost. Right? They had no clue where they were, what they had to do. So a bit like that lost in the jungle situation. And yet this unit found its way back. Right? Safely they all got back. And the reason that happened was the lieutenant, the leader of that unit, found a map in his pocket. They looked at that map and tried to figure out where they were and where they had to get to. They used that map and safely got out. Right? So it sounds like a pretty simple and probably something that happens frequently when you have when you get lost somewhere. You find you have a map and you follow the map and you get to where you need to get to. But the interesting thing about the story or the situation was that it was a wrong map. It was not a map of the Alps. What the lieutenant found, whether he knew it or he didn't know it, but actually what he was looking at was a map of a different mountain and a different area. He used the wrong map, and yet they got to the safety. What does that tell us? What do you think it tells us? They used a different map, and they got to safety. What is the implication of this? Why do you think they got back to safety even though they were following the wrong map? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so one response I see the leader wanted to keep his comrades motivated and everyone put in their efforts. Another one
Okay.
says he would have used the map as a motivational factor on the same line.
Yeah. Okay, so the one thing is that the map itself became a bit of a metaphor for confidence, for motivation. When we don't know if the leader actually knew if it was a wrong map or not, right? Maybe he knew and he was using it to drive confidence, or maybe he didn't know and he kept following some wrong cues, but yet the good news is that they got back to safety. And that kind of raises the question for our next section of this conversation: is then planning worth it? Right? So if you could move to the next slide, the issue is if plans go wrong from the moment the plans are made. And having been in the world of strategy and strategic planning for a major part of my corporate life, the one thing that I used to realize was that we used to make plans every year. Every year we used to make a 5-year plan, and every year we would go wrong on the plan that we made. Right? Forget the 5 years being right. First year of the 5-year plan would always be wrong, and then of course we would revise the plan every year, and every year it would be wrong. So the reality is that a plan is wrong in the sense the day you finalize the plan has become wrong. It's like a battle plan becoming obsolete when the first shot is fired, because after the first shot is fired, no one knows. And therefore the question is, does it even matter what the plan is? In the sense, like we had the map, does it matter what map it was? And therefore, should you even get into this work of doing things? Because as you all know, if you've been in organizations, you know that a lot of effort, time is spent on this process of planning. And therefore, should we waste our time planning? Because ultimately, the plan is wrong, and you may as well just use your instinct and find your way through. So if you, to answer this question, let's kind of look at one of the great military leaders of the world, but of course for the US. And the reason why we often use a lot of metaphors of the military in strategy, sort of strategies actually came from warfare, right? So therefore, as we look at the stories of soldiers, we look at stories of the military. General Eisenhower said, "Plans are nothing, but planning is everything." I think that's the important distinction we want to highlight. That the plan itself could be meaningless. It could go wrong, and it will be wrong the moment you finish planning it. And think about the plans that most corporates make, and many of you have been involved perhaps in annual planning processes. You begin planning for the next year sometime in October, November of this year. The plans get worked on for 3 months. You've planned something and you freeze the plan by January, February. You're bored, everyone gets into it, the approvals come in by March, and then you start working on the plan by April. But remember, the plan that you launched in April for that year has been created based on what happened in September. You started in September, October, and think about the March of the following year. You are about 18 months away from the plan. Okay? So you really don't know what you're building, because no one can predict that much ahead. What is therefore the value of planning? So to answer the question, is the plan critical? No. But is planning important? Extremely. The first value of the planning process is that it is actually a process of dialogue. It enables various parts of the organization to speak with each other without getting into certain judgments about performance. Right? So because often planning is looking ahead, we have dialogue, and particularly good planning involves all levels. Good planning is not done only by, it involves the frontline forces, and use their tacit knowledge to build some new things. The second thing is that a lot of plans actually involve assumptions. Planning is really a series of assumptions. We keep thinking about what might happen, what will happen. Now, often when planning is done, a few people make the assumptions. Those who have the knowledge, those who have the capacity to make those assumptions. But the planning process actually makes sure that all those assumptions are articulated clearly and disseminated, so everyone knows what the assumptions are. Therefore, if the assumptions go wrong, and they will surely go wrong, but when the assumptions go wrong, everyone knows what went wrong, and therefore the frontline teams are able to react faster because they can actually see that the assumption has gone wrong. So even though the plan doesn't really matter. It's the assumptions that matter a lot in the planning process. And bringing those assumptions up and making sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to assumptions is extremely crucial. The third value of planning is that ultimately the plan provides direction. Like we saw in the example of that military, the Swiss unit, a plan gives confidence to people that we can get ahead. And if you have involved all of them in the planning process, the fact that we have a plan makes everyone work in a certain direction. Now we know that the direction is right. What milestones we will face, what actually incidents will happen in the next few months, no one knows for sure. But the fact that we have a plan and we have gone through this process gives tremendous confidence to people who have to execute. And that's kind of what some of you mentioned, that the existence of the plan provides motivation, that the leader knows what's happening, and therefore all of us are in the same final value of the planning process is that it is often used by leaders as a way to identify high quality talent. Okay, because the planning process actually involves asking some very difficult questions. It actually looks at who is able to think differently from the rest of the organization, who is able to take maybe even a contrarian view. So planning process is not just about taking an Excel sheet and saying, okay, here's what the last 12 months were, let's drag that row for another 12 months. No, that's not really a good planning process. So highly talented people who are able to question what might happen, who come up with new ideas, who think out of the box, all those, no, you heard those phrases. But people who demonstrate such capabilities in the planning process are usually chosen for future leadership roles, and therefore it's an important way to involve usually junior and mid-level people, and then identify talent that has the potential for future leadership roles. It's something that I know many organizations do this as actually a talent identification process. Even though the plan itself maybe not so useful, but the fact that you figured out who are the good people who have this kind of thinking mindset helps the organization a lot. Now that we've understood kind of the value of the planning process, and that we must do planning, we'll look at how you can go about it, right? What are some of the ways, particularly in the context of uncertainty? Planning when everything is clear is planning uncertainty is something that we must figure out, and there are certain methods to go about it. And I'll hand it back to Dr. Korwar to talk about the methods involved in planning during uncertainty. Dr. Korwar.
Let's see if anybody has any questions or comments on the process and the value of the planning process. Any comments on that?
Yeah.
You can take those.
Yes, so Dr. Kovar, I see a few comments here. So one gentleman says, by planning, we get guidelines. There's a saying in the army, when in doubt, obey orders. And they said this is also one kind of plan strategy. Okay, and there's another one where they took an example of an organization that took about 6 months to come up with a travel policy, and just before they could publish it, the lockdown was announced. So the policy never was published. So that was an instance.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is something that we must talk about. What do you do in these times? Who could have predicted that?
But I think I sympathize with the people who probably worked for those 6 months on developing that travel policy, and will have to probably redo it all. But if they had done that policy discussion, in a systematic manner, okay, and if they had captured the key assumptions that lead to those actually, it will be very easy for them to redo the policy given the changed circumstances, right? I think the point I'm making is either if you do your planning properly and surface the assumptions and record them clearly, then when the assumptions change, you just have to kind of change those data points in the model, and your plan
Sorry,
is
Srini,
okay.
your
So
voice is
the
really
process,
breaking
if
up.
it is followed well,
Sorry, Srini.
okay. Now
Yeah, so let me
I
go on.
hope this is
I don't
clear. I
know.
was just saying that if you've done the process clearly, then you shouldn't have a problem even if things change.
Okay, shall I go on?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, let me go on. So all this, we have talked about the fact that we need a different metaphor for planning. And we have talked about the fact that the planning process does have value. So now the question is, in the world that we live in today, which is the world of uncertainty, it's all very well to talk about things when you know for sure, but given the fact that you know nothing for sure, as you know, what do we do? So how do we deal with uncertainty is the topic of the next session. So what we're talking about, what is uncertainty? Now, there are two kinds of uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that we faced before when coronavirus struck is one kind of uncertainty, which is really completely out of the blue. Nobody could have predicted, right? What happened then? The situation we are in today is also uncertainty, but it's a different kind of uncertainty. We know that corona has happened. There is now no question about whether it is real, whether it's happening, not happening. We know it has happened. It has already happened. Now what we don't know is what is the future like. So these two kinds of uncertainty are different and they need to be dealt with differently. So the first kind of uh, uncertainty is really the unstructurable uncertainty, which you see on the right hand side in this panel, which is the Titanic hitting an iceberg. Now, nobody had thought that this Titanic would hit an iceberg, but it did. There was an iceberg there. On the other hand, there are certain kinds of uncertainties which are structurable in the sense that, okay, you can say either this will happen or that will happen. This will happen, that will happen. In which case, you can create some kind of scenarios about what could happen in the world. We will talk about both kinds because both kinds are relevant in this world. But there is a fundamental difference between the two. One of them is completely unstructurable, completely out of the blue. It is what the author Taleb talks about as the black swan. A black swan is an event that is very, once in a lifetime event. Nobody can predict it, but it changes the fate of the world. Think of 9/11, for instance. These are things, certainly Corona is happening. Corona has changed the fate of the entire world, and nobody could have predicted it. Nobody. If it is structurable, which is the situation we are in today, it is not unknown whether Corona is happening or not. It has happened. Now the only question is what are the scenarios that can unfold? So starting where we are today, scenario planning will help. Starting where we were a few months ago is unstructurable. No amount of scenarios will help. This is a story that I like to tell always about the Battle of Waterloo. The Battle of Waterloo, as you know, changed the course of European history. It is the battle where Napoleon was defeated by the Duke of Wellington. And it is said that Napoleon went into that battle very confident that he would win because he had superior troops, he had superior artillery, and he should have won. And he was a good general too. But what happened was it rained the previous night. It rained the previous night, so Napoleon's artillery got stuck in the mud. He couldn't push it forward. So he made this fateful decision to wait. Now that decision to wait was fatal because it gave time for the Prussian army to come and reinforce Wellington, and he lost the battle. So the Battle of Waterloo and the fate of Europe that followed that was really determined by the rain that came the previous night. You could say, okay, well, he should have thought of that, right? I mean, it rained. But the reality is it doesn't rain in that part of the world at that time. It was very unusual rain. It was a rain that nobody could have predicted. And today, like several hundred years later, we know why it rained that day. It rained because there was a volcano in Indonesia. Imagine that. It rained in Europe because of a volcano in Indonesia. The volcano spewed up so much material into the air that it allowed for these rain clouds to coalesce in Europe and it rained in Europe. Of course, it probably rained in a lot of other places as well. But it rained in Europe at the site of Waterloo because of a volcano in Indonesia. It's probably the Krakatoa volcano. Now, if you think about that, well, how can you blame Napoleon for what happened? I mean, how could he have predicted a volcano in a place that he had never heard of? I'm sure he had never heard of Indonesia. So this is an example. And I was reading the other day about how a volcano in the Alaska, in the islands next to Alaska, could have caused changes that caused Cleopatra and Mark Antony to lose that battle to Octavian Caesar. If that had not happened, the history of the Roman Empire would have been different. So there's lots of examples like that, which are affected or influenced by something that happened which nobody could have predicted. Right? These are what we call black swans. The volcano in Indonesia, nobody could have anticipated. 9/11, well, nobody could have anticipated. Nobody did anticipate. The coronavirus is another example of something that nobody could have anticipated. These are not things that are structurable. These are things that are unstructurable. And therefore, the way we deal with them is different than the other kind. So before I get into dealing with unstructurable uncertainty like the coronavirus, I would like to take 15 minutes or so to talk about scenario planning, which is what happens today. Today, we know it is no longer uncertain that corona has happened. It has happened. And let's do a simple exercise on planning today. Corona has happened. The world is generally in lockdown. It's going to come out sooner or later. But how will it come out? And what will the scheme be when it comes out is something that we can do some scenario planning on. So let me walk you through a couple of thoughts and then I'll pause to get your views on this. The exercise that we use is called scenario planning. First step in scenarios is to list down all the things that we're pretty sure are going to happen. Number one, there's going to be a recession. All economies in the world are down. I don't think there is any two opinions about that. Will other pandemics keep happening? Yeah. Is there a long-term cure or a vaccine that's going to eliminate this virus? Very unlikely. Even if a vaccine is found, imagine administering it to 2 billion people. Not going to be easy. Therefore, we have to assume that this coronavirus is going to be with us. At the same time, technologies like artificial intelligence, video communication, they will make progress. They will keep, we're all operating on video today. And unfortunately, it is also, to me, it is obvious that there will be an increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots. The poor migrant workers, for instance, we know what this situation is because they are not wealthy, because they're not well off, they don't have steady jobs. They are in very much worse shape than those of us who have jobs and who have regular work. The gig economy, for instance, is completely shattered. So there is going to be a gap between the haves and the have-nots. At the same time, work from anywhere, I prefer to call it work from anywhere rather than work from home. Work from anywhere will be a reality. These are things that we are pretty sure are going to happen. If you don't think one of these things is going to happen, eliminate that from your list. That's fine. This is merely my opinion of what we're pretty sure is going to happen. Should I pause for a minute and see if anyone have disagree with this? These are things that are going to happen where we are today. Anybody disagrees with that? Take a minute to put something in your chat window.
I did see a couple of hands go up. Request the attendees to post the comments on the questions window in case you're not able to access the chat window.
Yeah, but okay. Let me wait a minute.
Yes, Dr. Porwar, I do see a couple of questions that have popped in. Let me read them out for you. One question is scenario planning. In scenario planning, is there a way to identify all variables or parameters which will influence the plan outcome? So this really isn't an answer to the question you asked, but I think it's a question in turn that the
it's something we'll talk about in a second. Yeah, we haven't started doing scenario planning yet. Yeah.
Yes. And I think a lot of other participants have expressed agreement. They said they agree with the points listed, and then AI will definitely be useful to track. Localization would be boosted, and those are the kind of responses I'm getting. And there's one
Okay,
suggestion.
great.
She said she can add one more. People will get more innovative and evolve their processes or products to suit the current times.
Well, we certainly hope so, yeah, because necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? And necessity has been imposed upon us. Okay, good. So let me move on and list the things that we don't know, which could go either way. And this is where scenario planning becomes. Number one, will society remember this pandemic or forget about it? What we mean is all the things that we have learned to do, social distancing, work from home, all that stuff. Uh, will it continue, or people will just get back to normal and risk everything? That could happen because remember the virus is not going away. So these are two extremes, you might say. Either society will remember this pandemic and change its behavior forever, or you're going to forget about it, get back into business as usual, and risk all kinds of things. This is a continuum with two extreme points. Will there be activism, for instance, where people are going to fight for the rights of those who don't have, uh, of the have-nots, basically? Will there be attempts to change the economic and political structure of the world because it is seen as being unfair? Activism, which essentially tries to change the structure of society, will that become rampant? Or will people essentially go back to where they are today? China versus US is something that appears to be a major force. Will they learn to get along, or will they split the world into separate spheres of influence? Will there be a China world and US world? It's something that we don't know. It could happen. It could be that we will get back to where we were before, where everybody is cooperating nicely. Will digital technology reach everyone, or will it be limited to the elite? Even if there are haves and have-nots, you must remember that even the people who went back, the migrant workers who went back to their villages, they still know how to use digital technology because they learned it in the urban centers where they were. So will they continue to have it, or will over time digital technology reach only the elite and not the poor people in the world? And the last one is, will governments become more intrusive and controlling, or will they step back and say, okay, we respect uh, certain liberties and certain data privacy and so on? So this is a little bit about data privacy issues, but it's more than that. The question is, how much will the government try to control the world? And this is different governments, not necessarily our government. These are some things that I think we don't know for sure. And these can be elements of a scenario activity. So the way a scenario planning activity works is like this. You look at all the things you don't know and you conjure up extreme values of the same force. So one force could be, will society remember this pandemic or forget about it? That's one. So one extreme value of that is society changes its behavior forever. The other extreme is there's no change in behavior. Everyone goes back to the way things were before. If you take, say, China and US, one extreme value would be that things will go back to normal cooperation within all the countries in the world. The other extreme would be China and the US will split the world into separate spheres of influence, like we used to have in the Cold War days, except there it was the Soviet Union in the US, but here it could be China and the US. So what you do is you take two forces. Why two? Because you get two by two that way. If you get a two by two, you get a nice four quadrants. Two by two gives you four quadrants. Now, if you get four quadrants, you get four scenarios. So typically the way scenario planning is done is you take two forces and you take two extreme values, but they should be independent of each other. The two forces cannot be the same force or dependent on each other. They have to be completely independent. Then you get two by two matrix. No, observe, of course, that not all forces are relevant to all industries. We have to choose the ones that are relevant to the one we are thinking of. So you consider extreme values of these, they'll give you four combinations. I'll just show you one example of one that we had done some time ago. Each scenario is a Each combination of 2 by 2 is a scenario. So what you have to do is you have to give each box a memorable, evocative name so that you know what that describes that world. So it's really a world that you're describing, a landscape that you're painting. So what you have to do is tell the story of how each scenario will play out for that given industry in that world. This will happen. This is the kind of company that this is what people will be doing. This is how lives will change. New roles that may emerge, new kinds of companies that may emerge, and so on. And like I said, let me show you an example very quickly. This is something that was done by a client of mine some time ago. This is for the IT industry, and they looked at two forces. The two forces were on the y-axis, either the world will grow with good normal growth, or it will go into a recession, economic recession. This is the other extreme. On the x-axis, they looked at globalization versus fragmentation into countries becoming much more nationalistic, protectionist, the H-1B visa problem that you see is happening in the US now, those kinds of things as being the other force. If you look at that, you get 4 quadrants. And these 4 quadrants, they gave these nice names. I like these names, that's why I thought I'd show that to you. If there is considerable growth and globalization, they called it Uberization. Means Uber-like behavior of all companies in the world. Uber at that time, today of course Uber is in bad shape, but at that time Uber ruled the world. Wherever you went, there was Uber, there was Airbnb, there was all these things, which the same companies were all over the world and they were doing very well with new business models, which is what happens when you have growth and globalization. When you have fragmentation, but there is still growth, but countries are becoming very protective of themselves and not allowing other people to come in. The term they gave for it is an evocative, nice name called United States of China. So you have China, you have United States of the US, you have United States of China as well, and everybody is behaving like that. If there's a recession and fragmentation, is the worst of both worlds, where essentially you have companies fighting with each other in a red ocean. The market is shrinking. There's tremendous price competition. People are fighting at very, very bitter and nasty wars, leading to a lot of bloodshed. A lot of companies will shut down, and a lot of, so they call it tribal warfare. The other quadrant is where there is globalization, but the world is not growing. The economies of the world are not growing. So what will happen is elephants will fight. Who are these elephants? These are the global giants. Global giants are allowed to operate all over the world because globalization, remember. But on the other hand, there is a recession. So the market is shrinking, but there are a few global giants. What they will do is they will fight for market share. So if you want to survive, you better join one of these elephants. Because as they say, when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. So you don't want to be the grass. You have to ride one of the elephants. So if Amazon and Google and Facebook and all are fighting all over the world, and you have to be one of them, you have to decide whom you want to join with. Fighting on your own is a non-option in this situation. So these are the scenarios that these people had conjured up. And I don't think these are very bad scenarios even for today's world. Because the one thing that you can see is, well, maybe growth is not going to happen so far, but the other quadrants are definitely relevant. So here, when you look at this, you get a sense of what can happen, and you have to think of the story. You have to tell the story of what will happen in each of these quadrants. And you have to think also what you will be doing. For instance, like I said, if the quadrant elephants fight is going to happen, then you have to be prepared to do one or two things. You have to decide which elephant to ride, because you better be on top of an elephant when the elephants are fighting. You don't want to be on the ground. So you have to decide which elephant is going to win and try to figure out which elephant to ride. The other thing that you can do if you really want to is go and seek government protection. In short, try to reverse the globalization and push it towards fragmentation. But remember, there's a recession on. And if there's fragmentation and there's a recession on, the situation is much more bloody because people are going to fight on price. They're going to fight on small things. Small companies will get wiped out, and you will have this tribal warfare scenario. So these are the scenarios, and they help you to think about different kinds of worlds than the world you are in today. Like we said in the case of planning, the real value of scenario planning is that it enables you to soak in and internalize these worlds, these different worlds that could happen. So that if one of them happens, then at least you're thought about it. You're not going to be surprised. Because remember, when any change happens, what is the first thing people do? Is they deny it. It is not happening. Data is wrong. People are making it up. This is not going to happen to me. Once you accept that, then you get angry, you reject it, you blame somebody else. All this wastes time and it prevents you from responding correctly. If you have already thought about it in a scenario planning exercise, at least you will save time by cutting through these non-productive phases of response, like denying it, fighting it. And say, okay, it's happening. I've thought about it. These are the things that will happen. This is what I do. So it enables you to respond much faster and much less painfully to the change that is going to happen if you have thought about it already. So that is the value of scenario planning. It changes the mental model. It changes the assumptions by which you do business. So this is scenario planning. And it is useful in today's world because in today's world, Corona has happened. There's no point discussing that. But how the world will change now is still up for discussion. So I would recommend to everybody that you should do some scenario planning now. It will help. None of the scenarios that you construct may actually happen, but thinking about them, dialoguing about them will help, just as in the case of plans and planning that we talked about. The plan you come up with may not be useful, but the process of planning will be useful. And the process of planning that makes the most sense today is scenario planning. So let me pause for a minute and see if people have comments in the chat.
Yes, so Dr. Korwat, there's a question. Aren't these access variables instead of being fixed ones? If these are variables, it changes the basis of scenario planning outcome.
Well, the way to keep it simple is to make it not variable, because what you want is extreme values of these forces. So the force of globalization, either it will be very strong or it will be very weak. You can make it a continuum, but then you got zillion scenarios. The best way to keep it simple and to have only four scenarios is to look at only extreme values. Everything else will be in the middle anyway. But what are the extreme situations will help you think through in much more stark terms what the scenario is. So I would recommend keeping it non-variable.
So, and one last question that has come up is there a guideline for selecting the two aspects for creating the grid?
Yeah, the guidelines are the following. Number one, they should be independent of each other. They should not be dependent on each other. And they should be relevant to that particular industry. For instance, and I will show you another example in a minute, which I've been thinking about higher education, for instance. There are some forces that are not particularly relevant to a given industry. So the forces should be relevant to the industry, they should be independent of each other, and they should be important forces that are going to shape the industry. Beyond that, there is no guideline. And ideally, you should have two, because two will give you four scenarios. If you do three, then it goes into an unmanageable number of scenarios. So if you have three forces, then do them two at a time. That is the most sensible way to do it. Then you will have 6 scenarios, 8 scenarios, but at least you'll have 4 at a time. Doing more than 4 at a time is difficult for any brain to comprehend. So a very practical matter, I would say stick to 2. If you have more than 2, do a separate exercise using the ones other than the 2 that you just used. But they have to be relevant to that industry.
And if I might add, the forces should be of uncertainty, in the sense that that if it is reasonably clear which way something is headed, then it's not useful as an axis for the scenario planning. There has to be a uncertainty which is reasonably, it could go both ways, right? And so it's a true uncertainty I think.
Yeah, right. That's very important, because if you know it's going to happen, then it is true in all scenarios, right? Like for instance, if we believe in this scenario that digital technology like AI is going to be everywhere, then it's in all four scenarios. So you have to consider it as a factor in all four scenarios. So it's not a factor for scenario planning per se to create the scenario, but in thinking about the landscape of the scenario, you have to think about it in all four cases. So whether it's Uberization or tribal warfare, artificial intelligence will be there. The only question is how will they be used differently by different people in those four scenarios. But this scenario planning thing, please remember, and I've seen many people, including big consulting companies, just you doing scenarios for post-COVID, essentially looking at it's like high, medium, low. What is the best case? What is the worst case? What is medium? That's not a useful way to think about scenarios. Scenario is not high, medium, low. Scenarios is four different pictures, completely different pictures of what could happen. And you think to each one of them as if they are the world. It's not high, medium, low. It's really four different scenarios that could develop based on the forces that are driving the world. Any other comments?
Yes, I see a comment. Yes, artificial intelligence considers all points and then generates the output. More than AI related.
Yeah, that's going to happen anyway.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, shall I go on?
Yes, Dr. Kumar.
Okay, so I will just show you another example of this very quickly, just for variety. I've been thinking about this a little bit about higher education, and higher education meaning college and university. What will happen to these industry or this world? What are the scenarios that one can generate? So first of all, what is the role of higher education? And this is true across scenarios. What I see is that higher education has three values that it does, or three things it delivers. Number one, knowledge transfer, which is just people teaching stuff. Interesting thing about this is that it can be replaced by technology. If you want to learn finance, or you want to learn accounting, or you want to learn physics for that matter, there are ways to teach that without human intervention. AI can do this nowadays. Therefore, knowledge transfer is something that can be very greatly enabled by technology. It can even be replaced by technology. Creation of knowledge is the second thing that higher education does. This cannot be replaced by technology. It can be encouraged, can be enabled by technology, but knowledge cannot be created by technology. Knowledge has to be created by people, and it often has to be created by people working with each other. Working remotely is a very difficult way to create knowledge. So some of this in work from home will probably go down at least 10%, in my view. The third thing that higher education does, which people ignore, is it builds social skills. Your ability to network, your ability to communicate. Like all of us remember all the things we did outside class, right? When you were in your college days, what do you remember? Do you remember what the teacher taught you? No. What you remember is all the stuff that went on outside the classroom. Because that is where you really built your social skills. That is where you made your friends. That is where you built the network which guides you even today. Now, these are three things that people need to recognize are all legitimate roles of higher education. Building of social skills, if there are no colleges, if there are no universities, what will happen? Well, there are other things like clubs, there are social service, there's military service, there are NGOs, there are other ways by which those capabilities can be built. And it's possible that in tomorrow's world, some of those will become more important because colleges as a way to build those will start declining. Imagine, for instance, that colleges become entirely remote and everybody, all colleges essentially shut down their campuses and everybody starts teaching on the net. You sit at home and you learn. Coronavirus is still there, but It is not as bad as you can't go out and meet people. In that case, you still need to go out and meet people. How will you do that? You won't do that to the college. You'll do it to all these other needs because it is still a requirement. It's a human need, and that human need, if it is not met by the college, it will be met by somebody else. So that is the point that I'm making. So let's look at remote online learning. It's definitely going to happen. Is it good enough today? Probably not. Is it going to get better? Certainly yes. Have people got used to the idea now that this is how it's going to be? Probably yes. Is it now the new normal? Probably yes. Which means that although all this remote and online learning isn't yet where it should be, is getting there very fast. So this lockdown has certainly accelerated it, and in future, it's quite likely. In fact, one of the things that Srini and I like to say is that 20, 30 years from now, you won't really need university because everything that can be learned, you can learn remotely. You can learn it when you need to learn it, which is on the job. And that's the best time to learn anyway. Therefore, colleges and universities may not survive anyway, given the way the technology is changing and given the way human needs are changing. But that's a separate issue I won't get into right now. So if you look at scenarios, the two forces that I have considered in this scenario is on one axis, society does not learn from the pandemic. The other axis, society learns the lessons of the pandemic, meaning society changes its behavior. There's a lot of remote work, work from anywhere, all that. If society does not learn, it means it just goes back to behaving the way it did before. On the y-axis is digital literacy. Is digital literacy global and widespread? On the other axis, no. Only a few people have it. In which case, what will the scenarios look like? The first scenario, I'll just spend some time talking about that, and the others I will not really go into. But here is a situation where digital literacy is widespread. Society has learned the lessons of the pandemic. Then what will happen? Certainly, remote education becomes the norm. And if you can sit anywhere in the world and learn from MIT or Cambridge or Harvard or anything, why will you even need to go to your local college? So one possibility is that the local ones will wither away. They will actually cease to exist. And the learning that you get, pure knowledge transfer, can be done by digital means. If you want to learn, let's say, strategic thinking, you can learn it directly from Harvard, right? I mean, you can sit at home and learn from Harvard. You don't have to go to your local business school. The universities will leverage their brand because that's the only thing they would have. Research will continue. Remember, knowledge creation is also an important function of the university system. But they will probably become remote. Conferences where people meet and discuss things will probably become less because you have learned the lesson of the pandemic that it's not a very great thing to do. At the same time, because the social aspect of colleges is declining, you will see an increase in military service, social services clubs, NGOs, people joining multiple clubs, because that is the only way you can maintain the social connect and the networking. So Rotary Club, Lions Club, all these will do better because that is the only way you can make friends. That is the only way you can network. And this is a situation in this kind of scenario. Obviously, all the other scenarios also one can figure out. I'll not go through discussing them, but I will leave them on for a couple of minutes. You can look at that. So here I'm looking at the scenarios for higher education that could develop. The assumption I'm making in all scenarios is that the virus continues. There's going to be a virus anyway. It's not dying. There's not going to be a vaccine that wipes out the. So this is a scenario for higher education. Again, same rules that I've followed. I've come up with this. I've not published it anyway yet, but this is something that I'm thinking about right now. So let me pause for a couple of minutes and see what comments people have.
Anyone who wishes to post a
And by
comment?
the way, since we're talking about
Please go ahead, Dr.
Okay, so let me ask you all to think about your industry. I would assume that most of you, since this is a NASSCOM event, most of you have something to do with the IT industry. If that is the case, what are the scenarios that you can generate for your industry? Can we have a quick 2-minute think of what are the forces that will drive this industry, the IT industry? If you can come up with 2 forces, you can construct 4 scenarios. So what are the 2 forces? If you have some thought, take 5 minutes, think about them and put them up in the chat window, and then we can discuss them for a couple of minutes. So take 5 minutes to do that. It's a good exercise to do. Your industry, I'm assuming it's the IT industry. If it's not, it's okay. You can take whatever industry you are in. What are the forces that are going to drive this industry over the next, say, 3 years? And what are the extreme values of those? So if you come up with 2 each, 2 forces, it'll help you construct the analysis. Let me see if there's some.
Yes. So, Dr. Some responses are already popping in. So, environmental forces, geopolitics, and people talking about employees will feed in crowdsourcing will be the new norm in IT. Remote working.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, remote working, I think we should take for granted. It's going to happen. But the thought of crowdsourcing, yes, that's a very good thought. And again, environmental forces is something to think about.
Then more freelancing, skill-based learning will see prominence.
Yep. Yep. See, some of these things are going to happen anyway, right? Like for instance, technology changes all the time. And our ability to learn technology, there's no point going back to what we learned in college, right? We have to learn it all the time. Therefore, that's a reality regardless of what happens in the future. So we all better learn to learn using technology anyway. So that's the only way technology can be learned because it changes too fast. And the same thing is true of business as well. So to some extent, ongoing learning, I think, is something that is a given. We have to do it.
Yes, and on the impact that you'd asked.
Yeah.
Purva, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, so on the impact that you had asked, we have some inputs there. So complete digitalization is one extreme, and a lot of SMEs would be shutting down. That would affect the overall IT industry.
Yeah. But when, in the what scenario would a lot of SMEs shut down? They would probably shut down in a situation where you have tremendous globalization and big global players who are really leveraging this scale.
Yeah, and so therefore one has there's another input which talks about decrease or increase in outsourcing activity. That will be another change.
Yeah. Especially, if you have a world that is highly fragmented. I mean, H-1B visas is one example. But if every country starts getting protectionist, and India is also talking about, self-sufficient Bharat and all that, in which case really the whole concept of outsourcing becomes very localized. You can do outsourcing, but it's not going to be offshoring so easily because people are going to rent. On the other hand, if technology continues to be good enough, offshoring is still possible because you're not actually sending people to the US. You're only doing work in other countries sitting at home. So it could cut both ways. You could have an increase in offshoring because of all these things, provided technology is still supportive, and digital technology continues to be widespread. And you could get an increase, in fact, in offshoring. On the other hand, sending people, creating businesses in other parts of the world will become more difficult. So setting up offices, say, in other parts of the world will become difficult if there is all this fragmentation. So you have to learn to operate from home much more than we would want to do. But for companies who are used to that anyway, that could be a good thing. So that could be our strength. We know how to do that. In fact, when this Corona thing first hit, I was telling all my IT company clients, tell everybody not to worry. We will handle it because we are used to doing work from home anyway. So turn that into a competitive advantage and a story to tell people that, don't worry, we can do it. We know how to do it. You may not know, we will do it.
Yeah. So, Dr. Korva, there's another
So
thought.
I'll wait a minute and see if there's any more thoughts. Yeah.
Yes. There's another thought that one of our attendees would like to see.
Yeah.
The question is, will medical and engineering education therefore get impacted due to COVID?
I'm not sure, partly because I don't know enough about medical education. But I would think that medical education works like any other education. It's got all these three functions: knowledge transfer, knowledge creation, and the social aspect. And therefore, if you have a highly fragmented world, you're going to have local knowledge creation much more than before. On the other hand, if technology is still supportive, then you can learn from anywhere. Therefore, you can sit here and learn from Harvard Medical School. And local medical colleges may die out if they can't compete with that. But you can still possibly get a degree from Harvard by sitting in India. So some of those things could happen depending on how the other force works. Other force being digital literacy or digital capability, you might say. Srini, any thoughts? You want to add something?
No, I think these are interesting. I have a lot of thoughts on the future of education, but I think that will be a separate webinar by itself on future of skilling and education. Thank you.
Okay, so let me move on. I think scenario planning, I just want to mention again, this is probably the relevant way to think about the future today. But please remember, that is not going to solve all your problems, because the fact is, these scenarios may not happen. Something else may happen altogether. And that something else could be something that we have no idea what it is. So let's turn to that. What happens when tomorrow dawns? When tomorrow dawns, what has happened in the middle of the night, we don't know. And we are now again possibly having to think about something happening which is not part of any of our scenarios, but something completely different, which again goes back to, could anyone have predicted the coronavirus? Could anyone have predicted 9/11? Answer is no. So what do we do? What happens, right? So what can the individual do? Like, in the Mahabharata, Karna had every weapon that was possible, but in the middle of the fight, exactly when he needed it most, his chariot gets stuck in the mud and he forgets everything. This is exactly what happens to people. Just when you need it the most, everything that you've been trained to do, you forget. What do you do? And here, the concept of anti-fragility is something that I will do take a couple of minutes to introduce. This is the concept that Taleb again has come up with, the guy who wrote Black Swan. And his point is this, that there are features and things and systems in this world, they respond differently to pressure. The fragile people, fragile things break when pressure is applied. Resilient ones are the ones who deal with the pressure and come back to their original state. But the best are anti-fragile. The anti-fragile ones are those people and organizations which take stress and come out of it stronger than before. It's like a diamond, which is just a piece of charcoal, but it has been turned by pressure into a diamond. So the question really is, how do we think about anti-fragile systems? We know that things will happen. Things like Corona will happen. Things like 9/11 will happen. How do you come out of it stronger than before is what we should spend a few minutes thinking about, because that appears to be the nature of the world we are living in. I said we know what's going to happen, Corona and all, but the fact is we don't know what's going to happen. Something worse could happen tomorrow, which we can't even imagine. So what can you do as an individual are some of the thoughts that I would like to share and get your thoughts on as well. First thing is be prepared for anything. Learn all the time and learn things that are different from what you normally learn. Diversity of learning is important. Talk to people you don't normally talk to. Read books you don't normally read. Watch YouTube channels that you don't normally watch. Because this is the way that you will learn stuff that you would otherwise be unprepared for. Stay agile, stay aware, look for early warning signs, pick up signals from the world. This is lost in the jungle, right? You have to pick up signals all the time. So staying agile is important, which means in financial terms, we talk about having enough cash reserves. Don't assume that your salary is going to come for the next 6 months. It may not come. In which case, can you survive at least a couple of months on the savings that you have? Cash reserves are important. Staying agile at the individual level translates sometimes to having enough cash. Keep testing your assumptions. You're assuming today that things are going to improve, the world is going to lift, lockdown is going to lift up, we're going to get back to work. But keep watching to see whether that's really happening. What are the assumptions that you're making? What are the signs that the assumption is happening or not happening? And this is, of course, generally true for all planets. But in this world, where you really don't know what's going to happen, the only thing to do is staying alert. Stay alert, talk to people, observe what's happening, and don't make assumptions that are not, justified. This is you as an individual. So let me take a minute and see if people have any thoughts on that. Because here we are really talking about anti-fragility with individuals. Individuals, how can we become anti-fragile? Anybody? I'll turn to organizations in a minute, but at the level of an individual, what can you do other than these things? If you have any other thoughts, it will be useful.
Yeah, so some inputs are coming in. So specialization on some relevant school is important. That's what participants are saying. And there's a question for you, Dr. Korwar. What kind of a leader do you think can do?
What kind of leader?
Do you think could do this?
Okay.
Sorry, Dr. Korwar, the audio.
Leader in these guys. Is that
No, Dr. Korwar, your voice not very clearly.
So, Suchita, maybe I can just comment on. If you could just repeat that those two questions, I can take them for Dr. Korwar.
Sure. So, in fact, there are a lot more questions popped in. The question was, what kind of a leader do you think can do this?
Okay. I don't think there's any different types of leaders that one has to do. In some ways, I think every individual must do it. I think the key thing is the first bullet point, really about learning diversity. Those who are prepared to explore their mind, to new things. So the attribute that I look for the most when when looking for people who can deal with this kind of uncertainty is curiosity. The person who has immense curiosity to know about things, expand their range of learning, uh, will do very well in such an environment. I believe everyone is curious. We just let the forces of pressure, stress, work, we put ourselves in boxes. Uh, but the one who can demonstrate curiosity is probably the one who can do this the best in terms of dealing with building new learning and then dealing
Okay,
with this
am I?
uncertainty. Yeah, you're back. I think you're better
Okay, I'm
audible.
back. I'm back. Yeah, yeah,
So maybe you can, Sujay, you can also share the other comments, and then Dr. Korwar can
yeah.
respond to those.
Absolutely. So I think, Shini, you summarized it already. So some of the responses are in line with what you just said. Actively seek challenges, cooperate and collaborate with people different from you, leave your comfort zone frequently. So those are the kind of responses.
That's very important. Yeah, leave your comfort zone frequently. Very important.
Yeah, if I may add, one of the things that I have seen a lot of people in their careers is that they continue to work in the same type of roles. They don't want to experiment. Someone tells them to go to a new location or try a new department. There's a lot of resistance, and the people who are able to deal with this kind of uncertainty, they can, even if they lose their job, they'll find something better. They will do their own things. Become a gig worker if required, are the ones who have had experiences which are different and which keep varying. If you keep in the same comfort zone, when the comfort slips away from under your feet, then you are no, then you just don't have the capacity to deal with it.
So I think it's important never to underestimate your own ability as a human being to learn and deal with things. We are capable of doing something, we know that, but there's a zillion more things we are capable of that we don't know, and we assume we can't do them. But in reality, we can. Human beings have enormous capability, and I think we need to learn to be open to that at the level of individual. So let me move to what you can do as an organization. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what can you
Yes.
do as an organization? The first thing is, don't deny that it is happening. Black swans determine the fate of the world, and they always have. When coronavirus has come, accept that it has arrived and adjust to it. Don't pretend that it hasn't happened. Number one. Don't try to control things centrally, and this is very important. Because if you're sitting in headquarters and trying to control everything that happens in the organization, the fact is you don't really know what is happening close to the ground. There are people close to the ground who know better than you do. They know best what is happening. So this is the time to let go some of the controls that you have and listen to people who are closer to the ground. The salesmen on the front line, the delivery folks on the front line, the people who are talking to customers every day. They are the ones who know what is going on. Empower them, listen to them, and let them make decisions as close to the ground as possible. So the first principle for organizations, I think, is to first of all accept that this has happened, and second is to let go control and empower people closer to the ground. Very hard to do, but you have to consciously do that and say, okay, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You figure it out, and I will support you. This is the best thing that an organization can do in this world. How are different customers behaving? We don't know. But the guy who's delivering to them, who's interacting with them every day, he knows. It takes time for this intelligence to creep up to the top of the organization. We don't have time. Don't live in fond hope, as I said. Taleb keeps talking about this. He's from Lebanon. He says there are many people in his family who believe that one day Lebanon will be peaceful and prosperous again. And he says they're living in a dream world. It's not going to happen. So don't believe these things will happen. They are not going to happen. Move on. So don't linger. Moving on is important. Diversify your strategic planning team. That is, don't just sit there with 5 senior VPs and come up with plans, because the people who are younger, who have more contrary views, who have more perspective, they're the people who need to be brought into your decision making. structure. These are things an organization can do. Hard to do, but you have to do that. So that is the only way an organization can deal with a corona-like event. Any comment from people on that? Makes sense? Makes sense. And this is really the last thing that we want to say. Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Korwar, I think so. A lot of people are in agreement. They think these are valuable lessons.
Okay, great. So let's move on. I think this is really the last thing we want to say with this famous quote from Nietzsche. What doesn't kill you will make you stronger. So assuming that we are not dead, everybody who's on this webinar, we will come out stronger out of it. Because if it doesn't kill you, the human being is the most anti-fragile system in the world. We learn, we adapt, and we become stronger. Nietzsche is not a great guy, but the fact is he did have some good thoughts. And one of them is this, that I really believe in. So all of us are going to come out of this stronger than we were before because we are fundamentally anti-fragile. And that is what we must kind of rely on. Rely on your own anti-fragility, rely on your own immunity system, rely on your body and your human ability to adapt because you can do it. You can do it much better than you think. And necessity is the mother of invention. Somebody pointed out that innovations will increase. Yes, they will increase because innovativeness is part of the anti-fragility of the human system. And that will only increase. So that is the last thought that we want to leave you with. And then we will stop, open up questions, whatever you want to do. Thank you.
There any final questions or comments? Happy to address them. I just want to summarize one thought that I strongly believe in, building on what Dr. Korwar said about humans as anti-fragile. It is our immunity, right? Our personal immunity, health immunity, that has caused I believe India to fight back against corona far better than many other countries have. And there's a certain reasons, good or bad, that we've built that immunity. I think equally many of us have to remember that we have to build professional immunity. And just like our fitness and our health helps us fight diseases better than anywhere else, you need to build similar immunity for your career and profession. And the only way to do that is through learning and skilling and being ahead of the skilling game. And that's where as Global Gyan, we're really excited to be partnering with NASSCOM FutureSkills, because it's our dream, and it's obviously a necessity for this country, but it's also our dream that we help individuals, professionals build their skills to fight with all the uncertainty that's around us in our careers and professions. So thank you very much for your time. And I think we have a couple of minutes. If there are any comments or questions, Dr. Korwar or I can respond.
So I think Dr. Korwar and Srini, thank you so much. A lot of the inputs that I'm getting towards the conclusion of the session is all about positivity. So it's a lot of amazing stuff that people have experienced. So very valuable, highly informative session. So very positive, acknowledgements. And I think Srini, thank you for summarizing this. I think primarily that's exactly what our professional skills gamut at FutureSkills NASSCOM is also quite focused on. The key takeaways from what Dr. Korwar earlier highlighted: continuous learning, problem solving. We talked about creative thinking. So I think that beautifully summarizes the whole offering that we have as well. Dr. Korwar, were you attempting to say something, sir?
No, I was just saying that thank you for the comments, and I think from our point of view, great experience. We enjoyed it. Sorry for all the technology problems of what to do. That's what it is.
When plans go bust, so that's exactly what happens.
When network goes bust.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining us. Look forward to another round of informative session soon. Stay healthy, everyone. Stay
Great.
safe. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.